Welcome to InFocus on this Sunday, July 10th, 2022. I'm Cheryl Wills. 50 years ago, a doctor at the Willowbrook State School on Staten Island invited television cameras inside to show the world how children with disabilities were being treated. This report by then WABC reporter Geraldo Rivera made national headlines. Shocking and graphic images of abuse and neglect inside a state-run institution sparked a public outcry, protests, and a federal class action lawsuit. Many parents who rescued their children from that facility turned into activists. Parents like Willie Mae Goodman, who's with us today. She rolled up her sleeves to save her daughter Margaret from Willowbrook. And at 91, she's still fighting. Also with us on this Sunday, activist Vicki Schneps. Her daughter, one of the 5,400 souls that were stuck at that institution a generation ago. City Council Minority Leader Joe Borelli is also here. How the Staten Island lawmaker continues to advocate for the city's most vulnerable children today. And later, as a little boy, he prayed for God to save him from the abuse and torture at Willowbrook. Today, those prayers the subject of his very emotional book. But first, July is Disability Pride Month, and the tragedy at Willowbrook changed how New Yorkers treat people with disabilities. Here is Victoria Manna.
My daughter Lara is my firstborn child. And when Lara was a few hours old, she turned blue in the nursery. And because of that lack of oxygen, she was discharged as a normal child. But in fact, within a few months, at her 3-month checkup, the doctor saw a blinking of the eyes, and it was really seizures. A very sweet but bittersweet pediatric neurologist said to us, she will always be a 3-month-old developmentally, and you've got to come to grips with it and deal with it. Then we began the search for help, and that took time. And we heard about a place on Staten Island called Willowbrook, where they had just built an infant rehabilitation center. But sadly, within a year of Lara's being there, Governor Rockefeller slashed the budget. And instantly, the people like my daughter, who was so helpless, were really some people were actually dying because they couldn't be fed or they were not able to be tended to. In the middle of all this, we're marching and picketing. There was a young cub reporter by the name of Geraldo Rivera, who had been snuck in, climbed the walls of Willowbrook by a doctor who worked there.
But I'd never seen anything like Willowbrook, never anything as horrible, people being treated as terribly as the developmentally disabled were in that place. It was filthy, it was understaffed, it was a dead end, it was like a concentration camp. It was really hard.
And we filed the suit. We were ultimately successful in the lawsuit, and that lawsuit is what closed down Willowbrook. And it was that lawsuit that forced the state to fund group homes.
We've continued with our charity Life's Work. We had our 34th annual golf tournament. We raised money to create small community-based residences.
So our goal is for the people with special needs to be the best they can be, and for us to provide the best services.
That's Victoria Manna reporting for us on this Sunday. The tragedy at Willowbrook State School is an important chapter in Staten Island's history. Let's bring in City Council Minority Leader Joe Borelli, who represents the island's South Shore. Councilman, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You know, you have been a longtime advocate for New Yorkers with special needs, with disabilities. Talk to us about how Willowbrook has changed how people with disabilities are treated.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, growing up on Staten Island, the concept of Willowbrook as a sort of an institution that was fundamentally bad hung over our heads. And certainly as politicians growing up and growing into our roles, we've always had this backdrop where this mass institutionalization of people who are individuals with families and people care for them and love them has set the stage essentially for how we address the special needs population going forward. So you hate to say something good coming out of something bad, but it did put this issue at the forefront for a lot of politicians.
Yeah, and the concerns always is budget cuts. Don't cut our budgets. What is happening in the city council as it relates to that issue?
Sure. So some of the budget cuts that affected schools were based on the loss of enrollment. We didn't see that same loss of enrollment with District 75 schools, which is a good thing. So many of those schools are intact. My wife, for example, is a teacher at PS 25, a special needs District 75 school. So it's good. The other side of that is making sure the students at those schools have access to the same resources that other children in zone schools get. When you talk about new science labs and laptop cards and technology grants and stuff like that, there's a great role for city council members, not just me, but all of my colleagues, to make sure that these special needs programs in our public schools are adequately funded. I think we do a pretty good job of that. We could certainly do better, but I know just from speaking to so many of my colleagues, it's always a priority.
Yeah, and talk to us about how the pandemic changed things. I mean, especially when, so many students with special needs fell behind. All students, I think it's fair to say, had to shift and readjust, but students with special needs had a really tough time over these last 2.5 years. So talk to us about what you saw as a minority leader.
Look, I'm glad that the previous mayor didn't keep the District 75 schools closed as long as he did some of the other elementary programs, or go back to 3 days a week and 2 days a week. I think that was a fundamentally good step. But you're right, there was so much lagging and fall off with some of these students. Remember, these are students that are on a broad spectrum of abilities. So you have some students who need simple reading and math help and focus, maybe the higher end of the spectrum. Those students also fell behind pretty significantly because they weren't getting access to their same in-person services. So we know, and we just heard the president announce that there's going to be more grants for students of all abilities to get programmatic help over the summer. We're seeing that trickle down into our public and private schools here in New York City, and I would encourage every parent of any child to take advantage of the programs that are out there for the summer.
City Council Minority Leader Joe Borelli, good to see you. We'd
too.
like to see you more.
Thank you.
Okay.